The Galactic Consortium had ruled the stars for millennia, vast and mighty, a coalition of countless species, each bringing their best technologies to the table in a delicate web of alliances and power struggles. Yet despite their advancements, the Consortium stagnated. No new breakthroughs, no revolutions, only refinements of what already existed. The galaxy was a shining but hollow jewel. Then the humans arrived. They came from the edge of the Orion Arm, a planet named Earth, barely achieving faster than light travel. Just a century prior to their application for membership, their technology was considered primitive, their culture volatile, their biology laughable compared to the resilient species that had colonized the stars. But protocol dictated they be given a hearing, a chance to prove their value before the High Council of Rovan Prime. Ambassador Kareth of the Vernathi, who had seen dozens of such applications in his tenure, expected little. He sat in the Grand Hall flanked by the shimmering representatives of the Consortium species, each more exotic than the last, waiting for the human envoy to embarrass themselves as so many others had. Kareth tapped one of his many fingers on the crystalline table board and distracted as the doors opened. Instead of a delegation, there was only one human, a woman dressed in an unassuming gray suit carrying what looked like a simple metal briefcase. Her movements were confident without arrogance, her steps quiet but deliberate. She introduced herself as Dr. Mara Elgin, representing the United Terran System. She placed the briefcase on the central plinth before the council and with a few practiced gestures opened it. Inside the case there was a small, unremarkable device. It hummed softly, emitting no visible energy signature, no recognizable technological markers. The council members leaned forward, curious despite themselves. Kareth sneered to himself. What could this relic possibly achieve? Dr. Elgin spoke, her voice calm but carrying clearly across the vast chamber. She explained that humans had developed something called the catalyst, a piece of technology capable of influencing matter and energy at a subatomic level in ways that current physics could not adequately describe. She offered a demonstration, requesting only a block of standard Consortium alloy to work with. The Vernathi aide reluctantly provided a cube, placing it carefully on the pedestal next to the catalyst. Mara touched the device to the alloy block and the block began to shift before their eyes. Within moments the once dense and heavy metal became lighter, shimmering with an iridescence none had seen before. She lifted it with one hand, the cube now weighing less than a whisper. Despite the drastic change, its structural integrity remained intact, no microfractures, no instability, no weaknesses. The room buzzed with sudden energy murmurs racing from representative to representative. Kareth leaned forward, unable to hide his curiosity now. Mara smiled faintly and continued. She explained that the catalyst was not a weapon, not a tool for destruction, but an enabler. It could transmute materials, generate energy from quantum fluctuations, even create biological tissue without errors or mutations in minutes. She offered no blueprints, no schematics. She stated plainly that the catalyst was more than the sum of its parts, a technology born from a scientific revolution on Earth, a discovery that had upended human civilization itself, rendering scarcity obsolete, reshaping societies, economies and governments. It was a key to a new future, but one humanity would share only under specific terms. The council erupted in debate. Some accused the humans of deception, others demanded the technology be seized, analyzed and replicated without permission. Kareth found himself in a rare state of conflicted thought. Even if it was a hoax, the implications were too vast to ignore. If it was real, it could break the Consortium's centuries-old equilibrium. Mara remained composed through the storm. She laid out the human proposal. Humanity would not give the catalyst to the Consortium outright. Instead, they would establish centers of advancement on neutral worlds open to all species willing to cooperate and learn, no matter their status or history. All data would be open source, all research shared freely, but control of the catalyst itself would remain with humanity until others could prove they understood its principles and could wield it responsibly. The council balked at the audacity, the youngest species demanding terms from the masters of the stars, yet the undeniable demonstration of power could not be dismissed easily. After hours of heated discussion, the session was adjourned without a vote. Tempers frayed, ambitions ignited. Kareth watched Mara leave the chamber, briefcase in hand, the tiny device now deactivated yet somehow more potent than 1,000 war fleets. He realized with a chill that the age of Consortium dominance was ending. A single human had changed everything, and it was only the beginning. In the corridors beyond the chamber, shadows moved. Representatives whispered secret plans. Emissaries sent coded messages to their homeworlds. The race was on to either embrace the catalyst or control it by any means necessary, but none truly understood what they were dealing with, and Mara Elgin knew that better than anyone. As the days passed following Dr. Mara Elgin's demonstration, the Consortium had plunged into a frenzy of speculation and preparation. Some factions called for immediate cooperation with humanity, hoping to gain access to the catalyst's technology before their rivals could. Others saw it as a threat to their centuries-old power and began to quietly prepare for what they viewed as an inevitable conflict. The once stable alliances between species began to fray, with mistrust spreading like wildfire. Ambassador Kareth found himself in an unusual position of uncertainty. Having seen the demonstration of the catalyst's power, he could no longer ignore its potential or its danger. He had served the Vernathi for over 500 years and had never been confronted by anything that could so quickly turn the tide of galactic power, yet he knew the Vernathi were not alone in their desire to harness the technology or control it. In the shadowy meeting rooms of the Vernathi embassy, Kareth convened with his closest advisors. They were a mix of politicians, military strategists, and technologists, all with their own perspectives on how best to handle the human challenge. "We must act swiftly," one of his aides said. "If the humans can truly share this technology, we must be among the first to secure it before the others learn how to replicate it." Kareth nodded slowly but did not offer immediate agreement. "If we move too quickly, we risk alienating humanity," he said, his voice thoughtful. "The catalyst is not just a tool, it is a symbol of everything the humans stand for. It would be wise to consider how they view us before making any decisions." The aide frowned. "Are you suggesting we let them dictate the terms of this new era? Do you think they will share it freely with us without demanding something in return?" Kareth met the aide's gaze with a cold resolve. "That is what makes them dangerous. Their confidence is their weapon. The humans will not simply hand over their technology, but they will not withhold it entirely either. They understand the power they hold, but they will not let that power corrupt them easily." The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. The humans were playing a different game from the rest of the galaxy, one that had no place for blind ambition or greed. Instead, their approach was built on cooperation, shared advancement, and mutual trust, but only on their own terms, a philosophy that made many of the Consortium's most powerful factions uncomfortable. Meanwhile, on the human side, Dr. Mara Elgin had returned to Earth, where she briefed the governing bodies on the reaction from the Consortium. The Terran government was prepared to stand firm in their demands for equal partnership on neutral ground, but Mara had a different perspective. She had always known that humanity was on the brink of something monumental, but now she saw the potential for far more than a simple exchange of technology. "The catalyst is only the beginning," Mara said to her closest advisors. "It is not just a key to new technologies but a key to a new kind of understanding between species. We cannot simply give it away. We must ensure that the galactic community recognizes that this is not just a tool but a foundation for a new order." Her team nodded, but some were clearly nervous. The idea of cooperation with the Consortium was risky. The galaxy was full of factions who would do anything to acquire such power, and humanity was still a young player on the stage. They knew they had to be cautious, but Mara's vision was clear. She understood that humanity's future was tied not to the technology itself but to the way they chose to wield it. Back on the galactic stage, factions began to form in response to humanity's offer. The largest and most influential was the Coalition of Progress, a loose alliance of species that saw the catalyst as the opportunity to reshape the galaxy into something more equitable and prosperous. These species were willing to meet humanity's demands for cooperation and research sharing in exchange for access to the catalyst's secrets. Opposing them was the Dominion of Jail, an empire of cold and calculating beings who believed in the supremacy of their own kind. They saw the catalyst as a potential weapon, one that could tip the scales of galactic power in their favor. The Dominion's leaders issued veiled threats to the Consortium, warning that any attempts to cooperate with the humans would result in dire consequences. In the shadows of the Consortium's capital, a new faction began to take shape: the Disciples of the Catalyst, led by former warlords, technologists, and renegade scientists. They believed that the catalyst was more than just a tool of progress. It was a means to transcend the limitations of biological life itself. In their eyes, humanity's willingness to share it was a weakness, and they were determined to exploit it. The stage was set for a galactic conflict the likes of which had never been seen before. Some sought peace and cooperation while others prepared for war. Yet amidst all the chaos, Mara Elgin remained resolute. She knew that the catalyst could change everything, but it would not be a simple process. The road ahead would be long and filled with challenges far greater than anyone could imagine. As the council reconvened to discuss the next steps in the wake of humanity's bold proposal, Kareth's thoughts were darkening. His earlier sense of uncertainty had shifted into one of deep foreboding. The arrival of the catalyst had shattered the old order, but it had also revealed something far more unsettling. The galaxy was no longer a place of clear winners and losers, but a crucible in which new powers would rise and fall. And at the center of it all stood a single species: humans, who had once been overlooked and underestimated but who now held the keys to a future none could predict. As the political climate across the galaxy shifted in response to the catalyst, new alliances were forged, and old ones began to crack under the pressure. The Consortium, once a unified power, found itself at the mercy of its own internal divisions. On one side, those who believed in the human proposal for cooperation gained ground, pushing for a new era of collaboration, while on the other, factions who saw the catalyst as a weapon to be monopolized or destroyed sought to undermine any efforts at peace. Kareth, ever the diplomat, found himself at the heart of the brewing storm. The Vernathi were a species that valued stability above all else, but they were also a people who had survived countless upheavals and had learned to adapt when faced with the unexpected. Kareth had seen the rise and fall of empires in his lifetime, but nothing compared to the forces now at play. His people were caught between the pull of cooperation and the pressure to protect their legacy of dominance. The catalyst, a small and unassuming device, had become more than just a piece of technology. It was now the symbol of a new age, one that threatened to displace the old order and create something entirely unknown. As much as Kareth respected the humans, he could not ignore the growing unease that the catalyst represented. If humanity was allowed to continue with their plans, they could reshape the very fabric of the galaxy in ways that no one, not even the most powerful of the Consortium species, could anticipate. Across the galaxy, in the heart of the Dominion of Jael, Emperor Korath paced in his private chamber, staring at a holographic map of the stars. His species had long dominated their sector, conquering countless worlds with ruthless efficiency. Yet the appearance of the catalyst had shaken even his iron resolve. The Jael believed in their own supremacy, and they had long viewed the rest of the galaxy as tools to be used for their own advancement. But the catalyst threatened to upend everything they had built. How do we control it? Korath muttered to himself, his voice low and menacing. How do we ensure that it does not fall into the hands of the weak and the undeserving? His closest advisors, a collection of elite military officers and strategists, stood silent, awaiting their emperor's orders. Koratha's mind raced through possible strategies. The Dominion was powerful, but it was not the only power in the galaxy. There were others, more subtle and insidious, who might gain control of the catalyst before the Dominion could. The idea of allowing humanity to remain the sole holders of such power was unthinkable. Send emissaries to the disciples of the catalyst, Korath ordered, his voice hardening. We will forge an alliance. Together, we will take the catalyst for ourselves, and we will bend the galaxy to our will. The disciples, a shadowy group of radical thinkers, had already begun to gather support for their cause. They believed that the catalyst was more than just a tool of advancement, it was the key to unlocking the next step in the evolution of life itself. They were not interested in merely using the catalyst to dominate others, they sought to transcend their physical forms and achieve something greater. Their rhetoric was filled with lofty ideals, but their methods were ruthless. They would stop at nothing to seize the catalyst, even if it meant destroying anyone who stood in their way. Back on Earth, Dr. Mara Elgin had returned to her role as a leader of the Terran government, but the pressure was mounting. The offer to share the catalyst had been met with varying degrees of acceptance and rejection, but none of the responses had been simple. There were those who saw humanity's position as one of incredible power and responsibility, and they understood that the catalyst could be used for the betterment of all species. But there were also those who feared that sharing the technology with others would lead to their own downfall. Mara sat in a darkened room, staring at a holographic projection of the Consortium's response. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her as she considered the path ahead. Humanity was standing at the crossroads of history, but it was clear that no matter what choice they made, they would be making enemies. The catalyst was not just a gift, it was a test, and the galaxy would be watching closely to see what humanity would do with it. We can't simply give it away, Mara muttered under her breath, her mind racing with possibilities. We have to show them that this is not just about power. It's about trust. About creating something better. But even as she spoke those words, she knew that the road ahead would be fraught with danger. The Dominion, the disciples, and even factions within the Consortium were all plotting in the shadows. There were forces at play that no one could fully understand, and the balance of power was shifting in ways that could not be predicted. Meanwhile, Mara's counterpart in the Coalition of Progress, a representative named Talia Lauren, had been working tirelessly to bring more species into the fold. The Coalition's vision was one of unity and shared prosperity, a galaxy where no species was left behind and where the catalyst could be used for the benefit of all. But Talia, too, understood the risks involved. The Consortium was not a monolithic entity, and its factions were at each other's throats. If humanity was to survive this upheaval, they would need to find allies, and fast. Time is running out, Talia said to Mara during a secure transmission. We cannot wait for the others to decide. We must act. We must secure the future of humanity, or risk losing it to those who would use the catalyst for destruction. Mara nodded, her expression grim. I agree. But we have to be careful. If we push too hard, we could push them all away. If we don't act quickly enough, we could lose everything. The galaxy was on the brink of a new age. The catalyst had opened a door, but it was unclear whether it would lead to a future of cooperation or war. In the coming days, humanity would have to choose its path, and the choices they made would have far-reaching consequences for every species in the galaxy. As tensions within the galaxy escalated, both visible and hidden forces began to take shape in the aftermath of the catalyst's revelation. Mara Elgin's cautious diplomacy with the Consortium was met with mixed results, but one thing had become certain: humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer one of insignificance. However, the path ahead would not be an easy one. The factions that had once ignored the humans now saw them as both a threat and an opportunity. In this new world order, Mara understood that her every move would be watched, and every decision weighed for its potential impact. Back on Earth, the global atmosphere had shifted. The revelation of the catalyst's potential had inspired a new wave of scientific and philosophical discussion, but it also provoked unease. The entire human race was now faced with an uncomfortable truth: their technological leap had made them the guardians of something far more powerful than anything their species had ever created. Some felt a sense of pride, while others feared the consequences of wielding such unimaginable power. The world governments scrambled to establish frameworks for the responsible management of the catalyst, but these efforts were often muddied by competing interests and geopolitical rivalry. At the United Nations, a summit was called to address humanity's future role in the galaxy. Mara was appointed to represent Earth's interests, and she stood before a hall filled with the world's most influential leaders. The air was thick with tension, the gravity of their decisions pressing down on each of them. Mara knew that their response would have repercussions far beyond their planet. We stand at the threshold of an era, she began, her voice steady but filled with an underlying urgency. The catalyst is not just a tool, it is the key to a new future. We can either embrace this opportunity and lead the galaxy into a new age of cooperation, or we can close the door and risk being left behind. But whatever we choose, we must do so together. Humanity must not fall prey to division or fear. The room was silent, all eyes on her as the weight of her words sunk in. There were murmurs of agreement, but there were also objections. Nations with more militaristic tendencies were skeptical of humanity's newfound role in galactic diplomacy. They argued that the catalyst should be weaponized to ensure Earth's dominance in the galaxy. Others, more peace-oriented, worried about the consequences of sharing such power with the unknown species of the Consortium. Each side held their own vision for the future, but none could deny that humanity's place was no longer as an observer, it was now that of a key player. In the vast reaches of space, the power struggle had only intensified. The Dominion of Jael, led by Emperor Korath, had taken swift action. While his emissaries had approached the disciples of the Catalyst with offers of alliance, he had also begun mobilizing his fleet. The Jael were nothing if not pragmatic, and they knew that seizing the Catalyst by force would be no easy feat, but Korath had never shied away from a challenge, and he believed that his empire's strength could secure the Catalyst before anyone else could. "We will not wait for the others to make a move," Korath declared to his generals. "The Catalyst will be ours, and no force in the galaxy will stop us from claiming it. If we must burn every bridge to do so, then so be it." Koratha's generals bowed in obedience, understanding the magnitude of his words. The Dominion's military might was second to none, and with the Catalyst in their hands, they could subjugate the galaxy under their rule. Yet even as Korath spoke with confidence, he could not shake the feeling that he was playing a dangerous game. If the Catalyst was as powerful as the humans claimed, he was not the only one who would come to possess it. Meanwhile, the disciples of the Catalyst, led by their charismatic and enigmatic leader, Elira, had begun to make their move. They had been watching the events unfold from the shadows, gathering resources and allies, carefully plotting their next step. For them, the Catalyst was not a mere tool to be used in the struggle for power, it was the path to transcendence, to a future beyond the limitations of flesh and blood. They believed that the evolution of all species was a slow and painful process, and that the catalyst could hasten that evolution, unlocking new forms of consciousness and existence. The galaxy is stagnant, Elira spoke to her followers, her voice soft but filled with fervor. The Consortium's endless bickering, the Dominion's wars, all of it is a reflection of a society that is blind to its true potential. The catalyst can free us from our mortal chains. It can elevate us, not just as individuals, but as a species. But we must act quickly, before the others turn it into a weapon. Her followers, many of whom had been outcasts or exiled from their respective species, were more than willing to follow her vision. They believed in the idea of collective ascension, that the catalyst would not only bring power but enlightenment. But in their desire to evolve, they were willing to sacrifice everything, perhaps even their very humanity. Back in the Consortium, the High Council had been slow to react. The Vernathi, led by Kareth, had remained cautious, advocating for diplomacy and dialogue, but the tension within the council was palpable. The fear of being left behind or outmaneuvered was growing, and some factions had already begun secretly advancing their own plans. The Coalition of Progress, under Talia Lauren's guidance, had begun quietly gathering support from neutral species who saw the value in humanity's philosophy of shared advancement, but even they knew that the fragile alliances they had forged could easily shatter if pushed too far. Kareth knew that the time for careful negotiation was running out. The galaxy was descending into a new kind of chaos, one that could either result in unprecedented cooperation or a cataclysmic war. He had always believed in maintaining balance, in protecting the status quo, but now he was no longer sure which path would preserve the peace. In the midst of this galactic turmoil, Mara's communications with the Consortium continued. She urged them to join humanity's vision of peace and shared progress, but she was not naive. She understood that the stakes had risen, and that those who sought to control the catalyst by force would not be swayed by words alone. The next steps would determine not only the future of humanity, but the future of the galaxy itself. As the war of ideologies raged on, one thing was clear: no one could predict how the catalyst would reshape the galaxy, but everyone knew that its power would not be easily contained. Whether for peace or war, the era of the Consortium had ended. And in its place, something new, something unknown, was about to emerge. As the galaxy's powers lined up for the inevitable clash, humanity found itself at a crossroads. Dr. Mara Elgin and her fellow leaders had never anticipated the depth of the conflict the catalyst would unleash. The choices they faced now weren't just about what was best for Earth, they were about ensuring the survival of a new way of life in a galaxy teetering on the edge of war. Humanity had become a beacon of hope for some, but to others, they were a threat to be eliminated. In Earth's capital, Mara convened with her closest advisors, weighing the decisions ahead. The political landscape had shifted dramatically, and their diplomacy with the Consortium was fragile at best. "We need to act, and we need to act soon," Mara said, her voice firm, but tinged with exhaustion. "The longer we delay, the more we give the Dominion and the Disciples an opportunity to take control." Or worse, her military advisor, General Tasha Bren, interjected, "They could push us into a corner, forcing us to use the catalyst in self-defense. We can't afford to fall behind, but we also can't let fear dictate our next move." Mara nodded, acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "We need allies. We need more than just the coalition. We need to show the galaxy that humanity can lead without falling to the same pitfalls of power that have brought the Consortium to this point. The catalyst is not just about strength, it's about the responsibility that comes with it." The Coalition of Progress, still a young alliance of species focused on mutual advancement, had shown promise, but there was no guarantee that they would survive the pressure from the Dominion and the Disciples. Some species within the coalition were already wavering, swayed by the promises of greater power and dominance offered by the more militaristic factions. While the high-level discussions continued on Earth, the situation in the galaxy had become even more volatile. Emperor Korath, undeterred by the opposition mounting against him, had already moved his fleet closer to key Consortium worlds. His agents worked in the shadows, coercing neutral factions and fracturing any alliances that could stand in his way. For Korath, the catalyst was not just a tool, it was a weapon, a means to bend the galaxy to his will. If the jail were to control it, they would be unstoppable. "We will take what is ours," Korath said to his war council, his voice cold and final. The catalyst is just the beginning. Once we have it, we will reshape this galaxy into one that serves our needs. The Dominion's ruthless tactics and overwhelming force were making their presence known, but they were not the only ones maneuvering for power. The disciples of the Catalyst, led by Elira, had begun to form a network of sympathizers and revolutionaries across the galaxy. They saw themselves as the true inheritors of the Catalyst's power, not as conquerors, but as ascendants. Their ideology was radical, with some of their leaders suggesting that the Catalyst could be used to transcend physical bodies altogether, merging minds into a collective consciousness. As Elira gathered her followers, she spoke passionately about the future they could create. "We are not merely trying to rule the galaxy," she said in a private transmission to her closest supporters. "We are trying to transcend it. The Catalyst is our key to understanding not just the universe, but the very fabric of life itself. Humanity is a stepping stone, but we will show them what they are too afraid to see, that evolution is not just a matter of biology. It is a matter of consciousness." Her words had an intoxicating effect on many who had long believed in the stagnation of their own species. For those disillusioned by the galaxy's power struggles, the disciples presented a vision of something greater, a life beyond the constraints of flesh, a future where the limits of existence were no longer defined by physical form. But for all their high-minded ideals, the disciples were as willing to use force as any other faction, and their desire to seize the Catalyst was just as dangerous. Back within the Consortium, Kareth faced mounting pressure. His cautious approach to the human situation was becoming increasingly untenable as the Consortium's factions moved to secure their own futures. It was clear that no amount of diplomacy would convince the Dominion or the disciples to step back from their objectives. The galaxy was on the brink of an all-out war, and Kareth's Vernathi people would need to choose a side, though he feared that no matter which side they joined, it would lead to devastating consequences. "We cannot afford to remain neutral much longer," Kareth said to his council, his voice heavy with the weight of leadership. "The Catalyst will either bring us together or destroy us. But it is becoming clearer every day that we will have to make a decision soon." The Vernathi were a deeply introspective species, and their ability to analyze situations from multiple angles often made them the most pragmatic of the Consortium's races. But even they could not escape the mounting pressure. Kareth, ever the diplomat, was now uncertain whether he had any more room to maneuver. If the Dominion and the disciples were not kept in check, the galaxy would soon be plunged into chaos. Back on Earth, Mara's communications had begun to take on a new urgency. She had worked tirelessly to reach out to the various factions, urging them to see beyond their immediate desires for power and control. She spoke of unity, of cooperation, of the possibility for a galaxy where all species could thrive, but her message was not falling on receptive ears. The Dominion was too hungry for control, the disciples too obsessed with transcendence, and the Consortium too fractured by internal power struggles. Humanity's idealism, while admirable, was not enough to hold the galaxy together. The Catalyst had come into their hands at a time of great instability, and it seemed as though the galaxy's ancient power structures would never allow such a force to be wielded by anyone other than those who had ruled for eons. And so, Mara knew, the time for diplomacy was nearly over. Humanity was faced with a choice: to act decisively and take control of their own future, or to risk losing the Catalyst to those who would use it for destruction. The galaxy had never seen such power concentrated in the hands of one species, and yet, as Mara stared at the map of the galaxy, she could not help but wonder if the very thing that gave humanity its strength might also be its greatest danger. As the galaxy descended deeper into chaos, Mara Elgin stood at the helm of humanity's most crucial decision yet. Time was running out, and she knew that the next move would define the fate of not only Earth but the entire galaxy. Diplomacy had failed, and the forces of the Dominion and the disciples were moving relentlessly toward their objectives. With the Catalyst at stake, every faction was determined to seize it, and none of them cared for humanity's ideals of peace. On Earth, preparations were underway for a full mobilization of humanity's resources. The once united Council of Nations had fractured under the pressure of competing interests, with some nations demanding that the Catalyst be used to guarantee Earth's dominance over the galaxy. Others, including Mara's inner circle, argued that the Catalyst's power should be shared, not hoarded. But regardless of the rhetoric, the question remained: would humanity stand tall as the galaxy's protectors, or would they be consumed by the same hunger for power that had brought the galaxy to the brink of war? Mara convened one final council with the heads of state, military leaders, and scientific advisors. The discussion was heated, with tempers flaring as everyone argued over the next course of action. General Tasha Bren, who had long been an advocate for a more aggressive approach, spoke with urgency. "We can't wait any longer," she said, her voice commanding. "If we don't move now, the Dominion will take the catalyst, and with it, any chance we have of leading the galaxy. We have the power to stop them, but we need to strike first." Tasha's words hit a nerve with several leaders, but Mara remained calm. She had heard such sentiments before, but she understood that the decision could not be made in haste. A single misstep could ignite a war that would tear the galaxy apart. "No," Mara responded firmly. "We won't be driven by fear. The catalyst is more than just a weapon, it's a symbol of what we could be. If we use it to destroy, we lose everything we stand for." But even as she spoke, Mara knew that her own resolve was beginning to crack. The pressure of maintaining humanity's integrity while facing the overwhelming forces of the Dominion and the Disciples was taking its toll. She had always believed in the power of diplomacy, but in the face of such overwhelming opposition, it seemed that words alone would never suffice. Meanwhile, on the front lines of the galaxy, the Jail Empire had grown bolder. Emperor Karath, having mobilized his fleet, had issued an ultimatum to the Consortium: either they surrender control of the catalyst, or the Jail would take it by force. Karatha's message was clear: there would be no negotiation, no compromise. The catalyst, and the future of the galaxy, would be claimed by the Jail, or the galaxy would burn. The Dominion's fleet stretched across the stars, a massive, intimidating presence that made even the most powerful races in the galaxy quake in fear. Karatha's military might was legendary, and his confidence in his ability to crush any opposition was absolute. The Jail were prepared for war, and they had no intention of backing down. In the shadows, the disciples of the Catalyst watched with growing anticipation. Elira, their leader, had long believed that the galaxy's struggle for power was a futile distraction from the true purpose of the Catalyst. To her, the war between the Dominion and the Consortium was merely a test of humanity's ability to rise above the base desires of control and violence. She had seen the promise of the Catalyst, and she was determined to unlock its true potential. Her followers were ready to act, and Elira's vision of transcendence began to take shape. The Catalyst, she believed, was not a tool for power, it was a doorway to a higher state of being. Those who embraced its potential would rise above their physical forms and achieve something greater, something beyond the limitations of flesh and blood. The disciples were prepared to wage their own war, not with weapons, but with ideas. They would challenge the galaxy's obsession with dominance, using the Catalyst to offer a new way of life. But their ideology, radical as it was, came with its own dangers. The disciples believed that the galaxy needed to evolve, but evolution came at a cost. To transcend the limitations of their bodies, they would have to leave behind everything they knew: species, identity, and individuality. It was a path few were willing to take, but for Elira, it was the only way forward. Back in the Consortium, the Vernathi were on the verge of a decision. Kareth, the diplomatic leader of his people, had watched the growing chaos with increasing concern. He had spent his life trying to preserve balance and prevent conflict, but now, the forces at play were beyond even his ability to control. "We cannot afford to be passive any longer," Kareth said to his council. "The Dominion and the Disciples are both forces of great power. If we do not act, we will be swept away by their ambitions. The Catalyst will either unite the galaxy or divide it irreparably. The question is, what side do we choose?" His people had always valued unity, but they also valued strength. Kareth knew that if the Vernathi aligned with the wrong side, they could be swept into a war that would destroy everything they had built. The future was uncertain, and the decision they made would determine not only the fate of the Vernathi but the fate of the galaxy itself. Back on Earth, Mara's message to the galaxy's leaders had begun to resonate with some, but not all. Humanity had proven its worth by surviving against impossible odds, but the real test was yet to come. The Catalyst, the symbol of a new age, had become the galaxy's most coveted treasure. And with the Dominion and the Disciples both moving to claim it, the galaxy stood at the precipice of destruction. In the final moments before the storm broke, Mara made a bold decision. She would not wait for the galaxy to decide. Humanity would take action, not out of fear, but out of hope. They would show the galaxy that there was another way, a way to use the catalyst for something greater than power or domination. "We will not be the pawns in their game," Mara declared. "We will stand as equals, as leaders. The catalyst will not be used for destruction, it will be used to bring the galaxy together." Her words echoed across the stars. The time for diplomacy was over. The time for action had arrived. The decision had been made, and there was no turning back. As the galaxy teetered on the edge of war, Mara, Elgin, and the leaders of humanity prepared for the greatest gamble of their lives. The catalyst would not fall into the hands of the Dominion or the Disciples. Humanity would not be a mere spectator in the galactic struggle for power. They would take charge of their own destiny, and they would show the galaxy that cooperation, not conquest, was the future. As the first wave of humanity's fleet launched into space, the magnitude of their actions became clear. The ships, sleek and advanced, formed a formidable force, but they were not just a military presence, they were symbols of the new path humanity was determined to carve. The fleet's mission was simple: to secure the catalyst and ensure that its power would be used for the collective good, not for the ambition of one empire or the radical ideology of a group of fanatics. Back on Earth, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. News of the fleet's launch spread across the globe, and the people of Earth, unified in a common cause, watched with bated breath. For the first time in centuries, humanity was no longer looking to others for protection or guidance. They were standing as equals, ready to shape the future of the galaxy. But the galaxy was not standing still. The Dominion had already begun its final preparations. Karatha's fleet, larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever seen, was moving toward the core systems. The Jail were determined to claim the catalyst and crush anyone who stood in their way. The dissonance between their desire for control and the potential of the catalyst to change the very nature of existence made them dangerous. Karath was not a ruler who sought peace, he sought dominance. At the same time, the disciples of the catalyst were making their move. Elira, now fully convinced of her vision, had mobilized her followers to take action. The disciples were not driven by the need for military might, they sought the catalyst as a means of transcendence. They wanted to evolve beyond their physical forms, to merge into something greater. Their shipyards were working at full capacity, and a fleet of their own was being assembled, though smaller and more decentralized than Karatha's. They would rely on their minds, their ability to inspire, and the loyalty of those who believed in their cause. In the heart of the galaxy, the Consortium's factions were beginning to fracture. The Vernathi, under Karatha's leadership, had already made their choice. Their people, guided by their deeply philosophical nature, had opted to align with humanity's vision of a cooperative future. They saw in Mara Elgin's words the same ideals that had once driven their own rise to prominence in the galaxy. But while the Vernathi joined humanity's cause, other factions within the Consortium were beginning to splinter, unsure whether to side with the Dominion's might or the Disciples' radical ideals. Mara's role had never been more critical. The battle for the catalyst had become more than just a fight for control, it had become a defining moment for the galaxy itself. The stakes were higher than ever before, and the decisions made in the next few days would determine the future for countless species. On the bridge of the flagship Arcadia, Mara stood facing the vast expanse of space. Her mind raced as she surveyed the stars before her. The fleet was moving toward the last known location of the catalyst, an ancient structure hidden deep within a nebula on the edge of Consortium space. The journey would not be easy. There were already reports of Dominion and Disciples ships moving into the area, and the battle for control of the catalyst was about to begin. "Captain, we've received word from the Vernathi," said General Tasha Bren, her voice laced with urgency. "They've committed their forces to our side. They're already positioning their fleet to assist us in securing the catalyst." Mara nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. The Vernathi's support was a critical boost, but she knew that this alliance alone would not guarantee success. The Dominion and the Disciples were formidable foes, and even with the Vernathi, humanity's forces were outnumbered. We cannot let this moment slip away, Mara said, her voice steady but resolute. Prepare for what's coming. We fight not for domination, but for the future. For peace. For the galaxy. As the fleet neared the nebula, the enormity of the task ahead weighed heavily on her. This was no longer a diplomatic mission, it was a battle for the very soul of the galaxy. The catalyst, capable of reshaping the very fabric of reality, would not be claimed by force or ideology alone. The species that would control it would need to prove they were worthy of its power. The first clash came as the fleets of the Dominion and the Disciples entered the nebula. The space was filled with the flashing lights of weapons fire and the resounding hum of energy shields. Mara's fleet engaged with precision, but the Dominion was relentless. Karatha's warships, vast and heavily armed, launched waves of devastating firepower, while the Disciples' smaller, more agile vessels darted in and out, attacking with precision strikes. In the midst of the chaos, Mara received a transmission from Elira. The leader of the Disciples had made her way aboard one of the remaining neutral ships, ready to speak directly with Mara. Humanity's vision is the only one that can ensure the survival of this galaxy, Elira said, her voice calm amidst the storm of battle. But you must understand, we seek something beyond mere power. We seek evolution. The catalyst will lead us beyond this conflict, to a future where war is no longer necessary. Mara felt a surge of determination. Elira's message was clear, the Disciples would not relent. The final decision was in her hands. And then, in the heart of the battle, with the catalyst within their reach, Mara made the call. Prepare the stabilization protocols. The catalyst must be activated, now. In that moment, as the catalyst's ancient technology hummed to life, something extraordinary happened. The fleets paused, as if the very fabric of space itself had shifted. The energy from the catalyst surged outward, enveloping the galaxy. The power was overwhelming, and for the first time, all those who fought for its control felt something more profound than ambition. Mara Elgin, standing at the helm of humanity's fate, knew that this was the moment that would change everything. The catalyst, no longer a weapon, had become the key to a new future. The galaxy would not be united by force, but by understanding, by cooperation, and by the willingness to evolve together. As the conflict subsided, the galaxy stood at the dawn of an era. And humanity, no longer a footnote in the history of the stars, had proven that they were capable not just of surviving, but of leading the galaxy toward a future none had thought possible.